When a man takes pregnenolone, it is preferentially converted into progesterone. It has its own mechanisms as pregnenolone and pregnenolone sulfate, and then it also converts a little bit into DHEA. The conversion to progesterone is beneficial as it then converts quite strongly to allopregnenolone. When pregnenolone is deficient, the brain is not able to keep itself in a state of homeostasis. So anytime... Okay, hello everyone listening to the Victory Men's Health podcast. It is me again. I am back today to talk about pregnenolone, or as some people in the US pronounce it, Pregnenolone. I like pregnenolone better, so I'm going to stick with that. I've been very interested in pregnenolone for a long time, and one of the reasons I got into pregnenolone initially was due to, at the time, desperately trying to recover from a very debilitating brain injury. And when I first started to research pregnenolone, I found that I couldn't find what I was looking for, despite this hormone being discovered the best part of a century even ago. And with it being used in medical practice for the best part of that period, there was very little information about pregnenolone that I could find. So as I was sifting through about 40 or 50 articles on PubMed, I decided to put together my own lecture on pregnenolone as well as DHEA to essentially make the lecture that I was looking for. At the time I was doing my postgraduate degree in neuropsychiatry, and I simply sat down on YouTube and made a bit of a presentation on Google Slides and hit record, and 4 or 5 years later it's got 100,000 views on YouTube, and I believe it's the most viewed video on pregnenolone to date. Since making that video, I've had dozens, easily, maybe into the hundreds, of people who've reached out to me who have watched that video and who've utilized pregnenolone, and it's changed their life. And this meant the absolute world to me, because pregnenolone also was part of the protocol that allowed me to get my life back. And I've had a very strong interest in the unique and far-reaching mechanisms of pregnenolone that make it so life-changing for the people who need it. But there's a very specific caveat there, is for the people who need it. So if you're going to listen to this podcast, please listen to the very end. Otherwise, the first part of the podcast is going to paint a very different picture to what I'm going to caveat that with in the second part, which is that pregnenolone is absolutely fantastic as an add-on to a men's hormone replacement therapy protocol. It is an integral part of a man's hormone replacement protocol for certain men, but not every man needs pregnenolone. And if you take pregnenolone when it's not needed, and you create a unnatural level and metabolism of pregnenolone in the body, you will actually receive side effects rather than benefits, and it will be more detrimental to your protocol than if you were not to take it in the first place. So the best place to start is, well, what is pregnenolone? Pregnenolone is a hormone. And some people refer to it as the grandmother or the grandfather hormone. I don't think it needs a gender, but it sits at the top of what's called the sex hormone cascade. And this cascade, which flows down through progesterone, over to cortisol, and then down to DHEA, and through to testosterone, estrogen, and DHT, this hormonal cascade is also called the steroidogenic cascade. And pregnenolone, sourced from cholesterol and metabolized via an enzyme called CYP11A1, which also has vitamin A as a precursor form, is essentially what gives life to the entire endocrine system in both men and women. Now, pregnenolone for a long time was thought to only have the role of being a precursor. It was thought to be biologically kind of redundant. It was just there to be a raw material to make the important hormones like progesterone and cortisol and testosterone and estrogen and so on and so forth. But in the more recent years, science has unraveled that pregnenolone actually has its own unique, very important mechanisms, as well as serving as a precursor to the rest of these important hormones in the body. So when a man takes pregnenolone, it is preferentially converted into progesterone. It has its own mechanisms as pregnenolone and pregnenolone sulfate, and then it also converts a little bit into DHEA. Now, the conversion to progesterone is beneficial as it then converts quite strongly to allopregnenolone. And allopregnenolone is very well studied in both men and women for mental health conditions. It is essentially, from a neurochemical level at least, kind of like your body's own endogenous, meaning internal, version of a benzodiazepine, like Valium or Xanax. It modulates a receptor called the GABA-A receptor very strongly. And this GABA-A receptor is the same site of action as a lot of relaxing compounds that we look at. So things like benzodiazepines that I mentioned before, but also things like alcohol and other sedatives. So when the brain is deficient in allopregnenolone and the precursor pregnenolone and pregnenolone sulfate, it's very common for men as well as women to experience a heightened state of anxiety, a very vicious and often aggressive form of what we call the monkey mind, which is the conscious thinking part of the human mind. But it also causes some far-reaching and negative detrimental effects to other systems in the body. It's very important the human body is able to oscillate naturally between the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight nervous system, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest system. And when pregnenolone is deficient, the body is essentially in a consistent sympathetic dominant nervous system state, which can be very difficult to recover from. People end up constantly stressed out with low energy. They can't get up in the morning. They can't fall asleep at night. They can't switch their mind off, but they also can't focus on anything. It's quite a torturous mental state to be in. And a lot of the time, people are going to the doctor, people are going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, trying to explain what these symptoms are, and they're getting told that it's a psychological issue, or they're getting told that they simply need to take some SSRI antidepressants, and Bob's your uncle, problem solved. Neither of these things work. And one thing that I've been quite fixated on, and I have said this in my original lecture, I've said this in the follow-up lectures, the Pregnenolone Masterclass, as well as my book Beyond TRT, which is on pregnenolone as well, is that if a man is deficient in pregnenolone, nothing will make him feel better until he corrects the pregnenolone deficiency. When the core foundation of the neurosteroid system in the brain, which is the hormonal system which modulates neurotransmission, so kind of like the puppet masters that sit at the top of how the neurotransmitters are created in response to stimulus. When this part of the brain is dysregulated, nothing downstream works properly. And then you get to consciously experience that machine essentially misfiring and being broken. This is not a good time. And it's very common for men with pregnenolone deficiencies to become very depressed, very anxious, and very suicidal because it can be very challenging to live with this. And one of the most profound pieces of feedback that I've received in my career have been from men who have reversed suicidal ideation as a result of correcting their previously undiagnosed pregnenolone deficiency. Pregnenolone also has some other very interesting mechanisms that I often use as part of my screening process to determine whether pregnenolone may be deficient if we're not able to test for it, or to warrant follow-up testing for pregnenolone, because for some people in certain countries, pregnenolone testing can be very difficult to get and be very, very expensive. One thing that I found in clients who are deficient in pregnenolone is that they will be hypersensitive to everything. So a tiny little bit of caffeine will send their anxiety through the roof. Any supplement or any pill that might cause a side effect gives them side effects. The tiniest little bit of THC will send them into a borderline psychosis episode, and a tiny little bit of alcohol will lead to a debilitating college-level hangover. This is because pregnenolone is important for modulating a receptor in the body called the pregnenolone X receptor, which is extremely important for phase 2 liver detoxification, which is eliminating toxins from the body. When pregnenolone is deficient, the brain is not able to keep itself in a state of homeostasis. So any time that you ingest something which may have an intoxicating effect, a little bit of caffeine, a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of a stimulant, a little bit of a psychiatric medication, a little bit of a recreational drug if that's your cup of tea, but anything that is going to shift your neurochemistry in one direction or another, the brain actually upregulates endogenous pregnenolone production to kind of keep a balance on things, to keep it from kind of going haywire, to keep that thermostat within a healthy range. When pregnenolone is deficient, the brain is not able to regulate itself as well. So it becomes very sensitive to anything that moves it in the wrong direction. This means that a little bit of poor quality food, a little bit of poor quality sleep, a little bit of something that's not a part of a regular diet can send people's biology completely astray. It can cause all kinds of digestive issues, it can cause all kinds of neurological issues, it can cause all kinds of psychological issues. Because this very important part of keeping things in balance and keeping the body regulating all these complex internal functions has been shut down. And over time, this can be more and more of an insidious process. Pregnenolone also functions in people who are deficient in it when it is corrected as a phenomenal nootropic. When pregnenolone is deficient, it's very common for people to develop a stutter, to have difficulty with verbal recall. And ironically, whenever I talk about this, I usually stutter and stammer over my words. So I'm glad I didn't do that this time, but I don't want to jinx it. Touch wood. And when someone is having problems with pregnenolone, it can be very difficult to articulate what's on their mind and to speak confidently. This can be quite debilitating when you show up in the world with this day in, day out for your career, for your relationships, for your friendships, because it can be very difficult to actually function neurologically. It can feel like you're under this debilitating brain fog that just never lifts and you feel like your mind's falling apart. And the research does show that pregnenolone does decline significantly with age and is protective against cognitive decline and dementia. Pregnenolone is extremely neuroprotective, so it makes sense for us to optimize pregnenolone levels, just like with DHEA, thyroid, melatonin, and testosterone, as a man ages. So when it comes to a pregnenolone deficiency, pregnenolone as well as DHEA are extremely important components of any protocol for primary hypogonadism. This is known as age-related hormone decline, because if you are old enough to experience a decline in your body's ability to produce testosterone, also known as andropause, the male version of menopause, then it also makes sense that you are going to be deficient in the other hormones which have also declined with age. It doesn't make any sense for a man to hit 60 years old and become clinically deficient in testosterone, yet have robust levels, youthful levels in fact, of pregnenolone, DHEA, thyroid, melatonin. Body doesn't work that way. Everything declines in a relatively linear fashion, but there is some variance from person to person, of course. But as a man gets older, it is much more likely that he is going to be deficient in pregnenolone and much more likely that he will benefit from pregnenolone supplementation. So if anyone listening to this is currently on a TRT protocol or is considering TRT for age-related hormone decline, it is imperative to get the best possible outcomes that you could get from a hormone replacement therapy protocol, not just a TRT protocol, to have a provider such as Victory Men's Health who can check for and treat pregnenolone deficiency as well. When a man goes on TRT and is deficient in pregnenolone and doesn't take pregnenolone alongside it, it can create problems. And this is because, and this is an analogy that I've kind of created, is that when we look at the hormones in the body, testosterone is kind of like an accelerator. It speeds up metabolic function. It gives you energy. It gives you well-being. It makes you feel alive again. I think that testosterone, without sounding too woo-woo, but a little bit esoteric, is kind of like a man's life force. And I could argue that from, every biological standpoint, but without getting too into the science, it's what gives men the grunt. It's what gives men the mojo. It's what gives men the zest for life and the upbeat, positive energy that we need to be able to go and do the things that we need to do in order to be successful, accomplished, and happy men.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
Thyroid is also similar. Thyroid stimulates glucose metabolism. It is also very important for energy and well-being. And DHEA, I would also argue, is part of this as well. DHEA has some pretty similar mechanisms to caffeine. Very important for energy, very important for libido, very important for well-being. These things are typically things that pick you up. However, if you have too much accelerator and you crank the accelerator up even more, but you're deficient in the brakes, you're going to have a bigger problem, because the disparity between the low-functioning brakes and the high-functioning accelerator is now bigger than when everything was deficient. So you can fix one problem, but then create another problem as well, just a different set of issues. So it's very common for men who are deficient in pregnenolone, and I have seen this in the Facebook forums for years, which is one of the reasons I keep making this content, is that too much testosterone, and for people who are listening, I put that in little inverted commas with my fingers, too much testosterone leads to benefits in the sense that libido improves and hypogonadal symptoms go away. But now these men get overstimulated, they can't sleep, they're sweating, they're cranked up all the time. But then when they reduce their dose, those problems go away, but then they lose the benefits of TRT that they were seeking in the first place. And they're constantly on this never-ending wild goose chase where they're trying to find this perfect, non-existent sweet spot between too much and too little testosterone. And a lot of the time, these men think that it might be a 1 or 2 or 3 milligrams per week, changing esters, changing injection frequency, constantly trying to fix this problem with the wrong set of tools. Because in reality, if pregnenolone is deficient, a man will not be able to tolerate the therapeutic dose of testosterone that he needs. Dr. Neil Rousier has been talking about this for a long time. My friend Dr. Keith Nichols has been banging the drum on this for much longer than me. And in practice, it is abundantly clear and abundantly true. Because what we want is we want men to be able to tolerate that first amount of testosterone that resolved their negative symptoms, but not lead to side effects. But the side effects are not coming from the testosterone itself. It's coming from a disparity and a distance between the other hormones in the body being out of balance. If you want to upgrade your car, you can't just supercharge the engine and leave the rest to need a service. It's not going to work very well. You'll speed out of the car park, sure. And then that supercharged engine is going to stress the rest of the car out and everything's going to fall apart. This is how the hormone system works. And a lot of the time, us men can kind of myopically focus on testosterone because we think that if we've got enough testosterone, we can conquer the world and solve all our problems. And if that was true, this would be a much easier job. It's not. Now, for young men, men who are in their 20s, who are dealing with this endocrine disruption issue, or their hormone system didn't develop properly because they were overweight during puberty, or all these different issues that the younger generation are experiencing, these guys don't tend to need extra pregnenolone and DHEA because it hasn't declined yet. The testosterone system's not working properly. But men who don't have a pregnenolone deficiency actually don't seem to do very well with more pregnenolone because of what I mentioned before, this preferential conversion to progesterone. Now, progesterone is not the bad guy. Progesterone is not a villain. We often think about the importance of progesterone for women, but just like for women, how a small amount of testosterone is absolutely vital, a small amount of progesterone for men is absolutely vital as well. But too much testosterone for a woman will cause problems, and too much progesterone for a man will also cause problems. And this is because in supraphysiological amounts, progesterone is anti-androgenic. It blocks the androgen receptor, and it reduces 5-alpha reductase, which is what testosterone needs to be converted into dihydrotestosterone, DHT, which is the strongest endogenous, meaning internal, agonist of the androgen receptor. It's the strongest thing that does testosterone stuff. So when you block the production of DHT and then you block the receptor from working with too much progesterone, now you can move in the opposite direction of the direction that you were trying to go in with TRT in the first place. And I think this is why the topic of pregnenolone is so unbelievably divisive and debated online, is because the guys who need it benefit from it just as much, if not more than they benefit from their TRT, whereas guys who don't need it and take it end up with some debilitating problems. And there is nothing that will kill sexual function and cause what I affectionately refer to as gummy worm dick, where your penis essentially just becomes an appendage for urination and has no sensitivity at all. It kind of becomes a 11th finger. This is not a good time. This is not a good place to be at. This can be quite distressing. And what's very common is for guys to try pregnenolone. It reduces their stress levels. They feel great. They sleep well. And then after 3 or 4 days from this overconversion to progesterone, they end up basically with the hypogonadal symptoms they had in the first place. And this is all because they're not working with a competent, qualified provider who understands how to test and treat for these more nuanced and less understood hormone deficiencies. But when it comes to optimizing hormones in men, all hormones must be optimal in balance to achieve the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve. So if a man only has a testosterone deficiency, then we just need to put testosterone in. But the older a man gets, and the more complex his case is, the more likely it is that there are multiple hormones which are deficient. We know with menopause treatment that women don't just need one hormone. Well, the good providers do. And with men, it's not just about testosterone either. Pregnenolone is extremely important. So when it comes to using pregnenolone, the number one thing, and in my Pregnenolone Masterclass, I make the joke of how many times I actually say this point because it's so important. Do not just go down to Walmart or go on Amazon or wherever people are buying supplements from and just buy a bottle of Pregnenolone and just take it and hope for the best. Pregnenolone needs to be respected just like testosterone and thyroid. It is a hormone, it requires testing, it requires clinical oversight, it requires monitoring, and it requires tweaking and optimization. Not everyone needs the same dose of pregnenolone, and oral hormones actually have much more individual variability than injectable hormones do because people seem to just metabolize them quite differently. Now, the extra point that I'm going to throw in, and I don't want this to get too long in the teeth, but there are some important points here, is that Dr. Mark Gordon has done some fantastic work on identifying that when men have traumatic brain injuries, pregnenolone can also become deficient. So for men who are combat veterans, men who are playing things like combat sports, especially that American football that you guys play over there, I mean, that's just asking for brain injuries. I watched one game of that when I was in the States, and as someone who treats brain injuries, it was like watching a massacre. It was horrible. Martial artists, or people who've just received severe concussions and knockouts, car accidents, all of these things, if you're hit in the right way, at the wrong time, and you go down the wrong way, the brain seems to become extremely deficient in pregnenolone and DHEA, which also causes a slew of essentially unresolvable psychiatric and psychological conditions, which can be very debilitating to live with. And I've met multiple veterans who've been on all kinds of psychiatric medications, been to all kinds of therapy, found out that their pregnenolone is completely undetectable, taken pregnenolone, and it has completely changed their life. I've had many grown men in tears expressing just how much of a difference this has made in their life. So if you've had a traumatic brain injury and you're dealing with psychological issues, if you're dealing with brain fog, if your health has deteriorated since then and you just don't know why, please check out Dr. Mark Gordon's work on pregnenolone. Please check out my work on pregnenolone. I have got some great podcasts with Victory Men's Health on pregnenolone. I've got some great episodes with my friend Dr. Keith Nichols where we go into pregnenolone, DHEA, and all these things. And you can also check out my Beyond TRT lecture on YouTube where I give my full breakdown on how to treat for and test pregnenolone deficiencies. All the information is there. It's all freely available. Educate yourself and then seek out a provider like Victory who can test, diagnose, and treat pregnenolone deficiencies. It's very important, and I would argue that it's almost vital, in fact, that if you are going to treat a pregnenolone deficiency, it is with pharmaceutical grade pregnenolone. If it's over the counter, it needs to be micronized, but I do not see the same results as we see in practice, and I have colleagues and also clinics that I've mentored all over the world who've seen the same results, is that pharmaceutical grade just works better. It needs to be micronized so that it skips the liver metabolism, phase 1 liver metabolism, and it is allowed to be absorbed in the gut mucosal lining, and ideally, if possible, also compounded in a sustained release matrix, which it allows for a more gradual, natural release of pregnenolone in the body. One of the most important things when it comes to hormone replacement therapy is stability, avoiding unnatural peaks and troughs. And while regular micronized pregnenolone is okay, sustained release, pharmaceutical grade, micronized pregnenolone is so much better tolerated and so much more beneficial to the resolution of negative symptoms that I would argue that it is almost vital to use a pharmaceutical grade pregnenolone. Over the counter can work, but it is far from optimal and it should only be a last resort in countries where it is not available to be prescribed by a practitioner. So please seek out a proper pregnenolone diagnosis and treatment if this sounds relevant to you. Pregnenolone testing should be part of every TRT provider's initial onboarding and follow-up lab work to be able to test for and treat deficiencies. And if men are deficient in pregnenolone and do not have it treated, they will never get the benefits that they're looking to achieve from TRT. So I hope that helped. and I will see you guys on the next one.
I think when it comes to testosterone, you want to get the optimal benefits of testosterone, and testosterone will continue to become more optimal for you until you take too much. There's not a lot that's changed in injectable dosing for testosterone in the last few years. It puts most people in a ballpark. Yeah. But it's not right. So the thing that blew me away at the Olympia, like I've been in an echo chamber for a long time of people who are